I'll be going through some of the basics of using Sk2, going through a lot of the GUI elements and what they mean in order for you to get comfortable with using it. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are the three mode buttons at the top of the Sk2 GUI in the top section. These are track, instance and plugin. These are basically the focus mode buttons. They select what template will be loaded depending on what's focused in Reaper. So if the track button is selected, then you select a track called, for instance, Submaster, like I have. It will load a template for the Submaster track. If you change track to, say, a reverb, track called Reverb, it will load an associated template with that track. So next we have the plugin instance mode, which effectively loads a template depending on the plugin instance's name. So if you have renamed a plugin Rear EQ1, and when you select that plugin to focus it, it will load a template for Rear EQ1. If you have another one of the same plugin, but it's Rear EQ2 this time, then it will load a dedicated template for that particular instance of Rear EQ. So it's useful, for instance, if you have something like Contact and you've renamed it Strings, and another instance of Contact and it's called something else, it will load a dedicated template for each of those instances rather than a standard template for Contact. Finally, we have the plugin mode, which doesn't load a template depending on the plugin's name. It actually uses the module name. So it doesn't matter whether you've renamed it Rear EQ1 or Rear EQ2, it will just load the template for that plugin, which is Rear EQ. So that's the main three mode buttons on the interface. Next, I'll just mention there's the settings button. So if you click the settings, it takes you back into the setup if you need to make any changes. If you right click, there are a whole host of options which I'll explain in another tutorial. Next, we have this section at the top here, which is the global layout section. These will basically activate global layouts, which overlay whatever's loaded on the focused layer, which are the bottom layers, the main layer and the layer above it. Then you have the global map layer, which so basically this will load up a global map which overlays whatever you've got loaded for the focused plugin or track. Continuing with layers, you have the purple layer here, which is basically an additional set of layers which can be individually overlaid the main bottom layer of a template. These purple layers are still associated with the focused track or plugin instance, whereas the global map layers are completely independent of whatever is currently focused. So next we have a global save button. If you ever make a change to a global map, that button should light up green, which indicates something has changed, and so therefore before you change or move away from that global map, you should save it if you've made any changes that need saving. Likewise, for the main and additional purple layers, we have a save button down here, which again, if you go into the assignment properties, make any changes, this save button will light up white to indicate that the template is dirty and for you to save any changes should you need to. As far as the main top section of the GUI goes, that's all I'm going to explain at the moment before moving on to actually making assignments, which is of course where Sk2 comes into its own, because without actually assigning anything to the controllers, it's pretty useless. So the bottom section of the main Sk2 GUI, you can see I have currently loaded in settings my main X-Touch and my X-Touch extender, which ready to go, but with no assignments at the moment in this particular project. If I switch back to track for the moment. So these are the assignment slots. They are determined by the controls on your controller. So here you can see for device 1, which is my main X-Touch, we have the faders, 8 faders and a master fader. And then underneath that, this is device 2, which is my extender, all the faders 1 to 8, which that controller has. You'll notice that they've been sorted. This is to do with this sort controls button here in the settings, which basically ensures that all the faders will get grouped together. So you've essentially got all 16 main faders and master fader all in one place to access the assignments for. And you scroll, I can scroll down with the mouse wheel. There is also a scroll bar here, and so you've got, the encoders from both devices, all the mutes, solos, selects, records, etc. And then all the additional buttons that I have on my main X-Touch show here. And then I have a load of dummy entries there, but I'm not going to worry about explaining that just for now. So let's say I actually want to assign some assignments for a particular track. Well, at the moment, Sk2 isn't focused on any particular track. I can either click the track button to focus it on the currently selected track, or change the track selection in Reaper, and you can see it updates in this indicator section here on the main GUI. The track submaster is selected. We're on the main layer because I haven't activated one of the other layers, and I won't explain the tag system just yet, but it's another way to load particular templates depending on what track is selected, rather than having to have individual templates for every track in your projects. So assuming this section here shows that there's an item focused, whether it be a plugin or a track, I can then click on any of these assignments here. If you click on the assignment name, it will open up the Sk2 fader properties window, which is where you make assignments. So going through this quickly, at the top here, that's the selected control, and you can go through them there, or you can click in the actual diagram for the controller. Likewise, you can switch to a different device, because I've got this is the extender here. I haven't actually made the two maps look the same just yet, but you get, basically this is what's loaded for each device. This is the layout. And here it says what's selected and would say what's assigned there, should anything be assigned. Currently, I've got absolutely nothing assigned to my controller. So underneath here in the left side panel, we have basically the top section, which shows the layer that we're editing. As I've already explained, there are 2 layers associated with focused tracks or plugins, and then above that there's a global map layer, and there's also a permanent map layer where anything you put in there will be permanently mapped to the particular control, no matter what. If it's in the permanent layer, you can't change it using any other layer. So here I can simply toggle through the layers. You'll notice that for the additional purple layer, this will always edit the layer that's highlighted purple in the main Sk2 GUI. So if I was to change that to layer 2, 3, 4, 5, you can see I'll be editing that particular layer. Only one can be active at any time. You can only edit one layer at a time. So global map, likewise, select a different global map, you'll be editing a different global map layer. The permanent map there's only one of, and the main layer there is only one of, which is always associated with the focus track or plugin. So the next button down on the left is the type of assignment you want to make. So we have plugin assignment, so one of the parameters from a particular plugin. We've got CC assignments, we've got track parameter assignments, actions, and internal assignments, which are built into Sk2 to perform particular functions that might be solely available in Sk2, but we'll get to that later. So to start with, I'm going to go for a track parameter. On the main fader 1, I'm going to set that to volume for the submaster track. I can put selected in here. I could hardwire it to the submaster, but as this particular template is only loaded for the submaster track, when the submaster track is selected, you can use the selected option there as well. Underneath the type of assignment selector is the name of the currently selected parameter, which you can rename to anything you like. There's an exclude envelope button. I'm not going to explain that just now, but it's to do with automatically showing envelopes. Print value, I won't go into just yet. Color, if you're lucky enough to have an X-touch or an extender, you can set a particular color so that the scribble script associated with the assignment slot will show in that color. You've got polarity switch so that the control works in reverse, and you can change what scribble strip it reports to, should you so require. But I'm happy with that. I'm going to go purple for volume, and basically to set that assignment, I would hit the apply button. And as you can see, that has now been mapped to my controller. You can't see at the moment, but my X-touch is now showing the volume for the submaster channel under fader 1. And it's controllable using the X-touch. You'll also notice now that the save button is lit up. As I said earlier, it's lit up for the track layer, the track focus track or plugin layer. And if I want to save these changes, I would do so before changing track, because you run the risk of losing it if it then tries to load another template before hitting save. So save often if you're making changes. You'll notice that when I applied the track parameter, it moved on to the next slot. That's because I have the auto button selected there. If I take the auto button off and I then was to apply it, it remains on the currently selected one. So whichever you prefer. It's useful to have auto on if you're going to map all 8 faders to different things that are sort of quite close by. Makes it a little bit quicker than having to then select the next control. So next I'm going to select an encoder. I'm going to make it green, and I'm going to set it to pan. And the selected one again, I'm fairly happy with everything else. The encoder has an encoder resolution, which is basically a sensitivity for how the encoder works. So obviously to get the right sort of feel on the control, you'll have to play around with these and decide what's the best sensitivity for whatever parameter you're assigning to that. So once I'm happy with that, I will hit apply. And although you can't see it on this screen here yet, if I scroll down a bit, there it is. We have the pan assigned, and it's got green. You can change the colors by clicking in here, and it instantly changes the associated color of the scribble strip for that control, should you have an X-touch. So I'm happy with that assignment, so I'll hit the save button. You'll notice when the properties window is open, there's a red box around this part of the GUI. This just indicates that it's, with the properties window open, it's locked the loading of new maps. So if I was to change track in Reaper or something, or do something else that might require a template change, it actually won't do anything until I close the properties window. This is to prevent you getting confused and ending up writing, accidentally changing track and making assignments to the wrong template and not realizing it. So basically it's locked out with that, and if I was to close that, it goes away and I can now change track again. And as I've saved it, you'll notice that when I reselect the submaster track, it loads up the template that I've started to create. Now, just because a track we're using the track monitor section, we can still add plugin parameters to it. You'll notice also that when I clicked on there to open this up, it's opened up the global map, because it always opens up on the highest visible enabled layer. So if I have global map layer open and I click on that, it automatically goes into the global map. If I switch that off and go in, it goes onto the main layer, because that's the only layer that's active. And if I was to activate layer 1 and click on it, it goes into layer 1 to edit layer 1. So that's just a quick way of ensuring you go in on the right layer. So if I click on here again, I'm on the track map, which is what I want to work on. I want to add a plugin assignment to Fader 2. So if I was to click here, it shows all the plugins that are on my submaster track. Obviously, if you're adding plugin associations in Sk2 on a track, when you're in a track mode, not much point in if you've got variable plugin list that's different in every project. You don't really want to add plugin assignments into your track template, because if you load a new project which has a submaster, it might have different plugins on it. The associations won't match. So there's no point in doing that. If you work in projects that are very flexible like that and use different plugin chains, it's best then to use the instance or plugin modes to access plugin parameters. But if, however, you have a fairly static, this is just an example, it isn't my real master chain, but if you have a fairly static master chain, then you can actually add plugin parameters to your track layout. So I'm going to have a look. I'm going to add some Expanse 3D because there's not too much to it. So I choose that plugin. These are the parameters available with that plugin. And all I need to do is I'll assign a color. You can do this in any order, as long as when you hit apply, it's set up as you want. It will write the current values to it, to the slot. So I add width. I'm now going to move on to the next one, add depth, and the next one, add height. And yeah, there you go. It's as easy as that. If I've got some buttons, so I'm going to add this one to bypass. Now for a simple bypass button, it is just as easy just to literally set it up like that. We'll make it a toggle button because we want it to have an on and an off state. You've got this edit button states where the off state will be 0, the on state will be 1. That's all set up by default for a toggle style button. We also have hold sustain style, single, and hold and repeat, which basically just change how the button reacts to being pressed. But for a bypass button, toggle is normally what you need. And I will just hit apply on that. And I now have a bypass button on here, which if I was to press it, press the button on the controller, it's bypassed the plugin, and I release it and it unbypasses the plugin. Many plugins might have multiple choice buttons where you have 3 or more different settings, and it's easy to set those up. You would select the type. I don't know if any of these have. Yeah, we got mode buttons on Space Enhancers. So I will choose one of those. I can then work out in the plugin GUI. So I would open the plugin GUI here. And so we've got mode under width. So it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 different states. So I would just set that to 4. I would then predict that the different states, probably 0.33, 0.66, and 1. Some plugins don't have them evenly spaced, and you'll actually have to work out what values to put in here. So there's also another way to automatically set up the button states, and that's by double clicking on the button state bit at the top, and it automatically does the maths for you if they're evenly spaced. And then you've got value text. This is what will be shown on the scribble strip or indicator. And so I'd have to look at the plugin. So we've got normal, inverted, alternate, and alt inverted. So normal, I can't even remember what the other one was now. Inverted, alt. So inverted. You can only go up to 7 letters in here because that's the limit of a standard MCU scribble strip, which is what the Sk2 uses. And I'm not aware of any other available systems that have larger scribble strips that you can access. So we've put that limit in. So we've got alternate. And finally, alt-inv. So once I'm happy with that, I can then apply it and test it out. So we can have a look. I'm testing it out. Here you can see the scribble strip showing what's selected. Whether it actually matches the plugin, I'll have to double check because sometimes things might be in reverse. That's down to how the plugin's coded. So let's try it again. So we got alternate, alternate, alt-inv, normal. It doesn't show, doesn't always show the scribble strip on the GUI here because when something is switched off, it doesn't pop up. And essentially this is in the off position on normal and inverted. So yeah, that's all working perfectly. So that's the gist of setting up a plugin in track mode. It's exactly the same if you were doing it in the instance or plugin modes. The main difference is this drop-down list will be locked because it's locked to the Focus plugin when you're working in instance or plugin mode. If we can go to CCs, so let's say I want to have channel 1 send modulation. Let's have 14-bit modulation. I can assign that to fader 5. Let's make it its own color. And I can even rename this to CC, let's call it modulation as it's CC1. And now if I apply this, you can see we have modulation assigned. It's actually got a print value of 0. Ignore that for the moment, but there is a purpose behind that. And basically now if I arm my submaster track for recording MIDI and I set it to all MIDI inputs, monitor it, and I then move number 5, fader 5 on my Sk2, this is actually sending now MIDI CCs to be ready to be captured on the submaster track. Next, I will look at, we've done track. There are other options as you can see in track. There's also this internal offset. Basically, this enables you to create an entire mixer style panel on your Sk2 or other device, and with an internal track offset, which you can then use specific commands to increase and decrease this track offset. So it just means that you'd set fader 1 to track offset 0, fader 2 to track offset 1, fader 3 to track offset 2, etc., etc. Assuming you've assigned volume to all of the faders, it means it will control the volumes of the first track, which is the track where the track offset is set to, and you can then use sort of bank buttons to bank up and down your tracks and everything, and it just works like a proper mixer control surface. These track offsets will work for all the parameters you can have. We also have send assignments, so you can go up to send 8 which I think is enough for most people. After that, so on the next assignment type, we have actions, and this works pretty simply. You probably normally assign an action to a button, and what you do is you would highlight in the action list. The action list must be open when you're doing this, or you would highlight a particular action. So let's just choose one at random that I have installed. Okay, let's just try nudge master output 1 volume plus 1 decibel. I would then go paste from action list. It's grabbed that action and got the information it requires in order to make the assignment. I can then give it a color again. It's set it to a single option, and you can't some actions you can have the value of the action monitored if it has a value that's stored that you can get access to, or you can set it to no, as in don't monitor it, and what will happen is that the light for that button will remain off unless you push it, when it would flash on and then go off again. So I want to apply this to select 4. I've done that, and again you can now see that that action is assigned to that button. So, you know, that's the very basics of Sk2 and making assignments. As long as you hit that save button after you've added parameters, it all should work. So let's look again and just try and describe these additional layers that we have. So for Submaster, I've currently set this up. But let's say I want access to a different plugin, and let's assume I've run out of faders on this level, or there aren't enough faders to put in what I want. So I want to set up an alternate layer. So I would choose the layer that I want to add it to. So let's call it layer 1. I then want to choose the plugin I want to control. So let's just say I want to add the maximizer in with simply a threshold. So I want to set that to fader 1. Now you think, well, I put the volume on fader 1. Yes, I put the volume on fader 1, but that's in the main layer. I can also assign something different to fader 1 on this second layer, but I'm going to put it on fader 2. So I'm setting up this assignment, and you'll notice because that's active, it becomes visible straight away, and that is actually what's showing on my X-Touch, is it's controlling threshold. What you will also notice is that all assignments on the underlying layer are also still visible. So I've still got access to volume should I need it. Obviously, any controls that you've assigned a new assignment to, that will basically become the current assignment. So if I wanted to get back to the width space enhancer, I would have to switch off the overlay layer, layer 1. Now you've got up to 8 of these layers, these overlay layers. There's actually 12. There's 4 more under the hood, which you can access via internal assignments, which I'll get to in a minute. But basically that's the gist of the additional layers. And likewise, you have these global layers, which are completely not linked to any focus track or plugin. These will basically be permanent across all projects. So for instance, if I'd created that aforementioned mixer layout, I would probably put that on a global map so that I can activate it at any time just by activating that global map. So the next thing I should probably mention is that we have an internal section. So this gives you different groups of things, which I'll try and explain briefly. So we have the internal track offset. I mentioned with the mixer view, if you have used the track offset track selection options when setting up faders 1 to 8 for volume, for example, I can add a track offset -1 and +1. That would be like skipping through individual channels up and down. So I would assign those to, say, the channel buttons on the X-Touch. I would use the -8 and +8 track offset if I have 8 faders available to me. I've actually got an X-Touch and an extender, so that would make it 16 faders. So I might wish to use the 16 bank by 16 option. Global maps, again, this is entirely related to the global maps section up here. So enable disable, which is the equivalent of pushing this button here. That actually lost where I was, but that's okay. Then you can create a previous global map button. These you can assign to any buttons on your controller. So you can have previous global map toggle, next global map toggle, which would basically cycle through the global maps in order to select them. And then you've got specific select global map 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. It should be fairly self-explanatory. Now for these, you can actually set up a type. So if I was, say, to use this button here as select global map 1, I could actually set that up as a hold sustain type button. Now what this will do, if I apply it, when I push this button up here, which is called MIDI tracks, it will only activate the global layer whilst I'm pushing and holding the button. So essentially it's like a shift button to access the global map layer that I've selected, so global map 1 in this case. So basically you can do it so that it changes the associated parameters just when I'm holding that button. I can make adjustments, let go of the button, and it returns me to where I was before. Then we have common functions. So we have the flip, which will do a swap of faders and encoders, assuming it's set up in your control map. The X-Touch works perfectly with this. So whatever's on your encoders becomes assigned to the faders, and whatever was on the faders becomes assigned to the encoders whilst the flip is on. So it's basically just a shortcut to this button here, and it just switches them around. So we've got select track mode, select plugin instance mode, select plugin mode. So again, you can map most of the things that are up in the top section of the GUI, these buttons. Most of them are actually mappable to your controller device, should you so wish. That's time beats display switch. So it switches between USMTP displays and time display on the X-Touch LED display section. I'm not going to go into too many of the other things right now because it will make this simple tutorial a lot more complex, but rest assured, if there's a function that's available in Sk2, you can normally find it in here. Another thing that we do have is on the main GUI is a fine tune button. This basically will set all faders to the center position and restrict the amount of change that moving the fader up and down has on the actual parameters, and you've got different ranges. Again, these can be set up using these internal assignments. And basically, if you move a fader up, so let's say I'm looking at this volume, you can see now this is the full movement of the fader at the moment. So if I was to now change that range to say 8, now it's got a much smaller range for the full travel of the fader. And what also happens is that if I let go of the fader, it will recenter itself. So that's how the fine tune is programmed to work. So another thing that I want to show you is this FB button. This basically enables different types of feedback to the controller, and there are different options in the right click menu for it as well. Now some of these are quite important, some are just a preference to what you want. So should the FB button be blue? It won't feed back any live CC data or any CC data from the track during playback. However, it will feed back when stopped. It will chase the current CC values and set the faders appropriately. If it's green, that's because live CC feedback is enabled there. If I was to switch that off, that would be orange, which means you can't have live CC feedback anyway, but it will live feedback for other automation types. But I'm going to leave it on for the moment. So blue is basically no live feedback during playback. Green, live feedback during playback. The feedback values to scribble strip option basically disables any attempts to send current parameter values to the scribble strips. If you have no scribble strips, you may as well have that option off to ensure that there's no additional processing going on that you're unaware of. But if you're lucky enough to have scribble strips on an MCU device, then it's always nice to see those values. There's a disable scribble strips on playback option. This will basically sending data, which is basically sysx messages constantly for some automated parameters, can basically eat up a lot of processing, or at least it can fill up the MIDI buffer pretty quick. And you'll find that fader movements become a little juddery if you've got live fader movements switched on. So this option basically disables during playback any scribble strip feedback and essentially makes fader movements a lot more fluid as the controls on the controller are following any automation you have in a project. So for now, that's probably everything that I needed to talk about until I switch stop, and then I'll probably think of a ton of other stuff that I meant to have mentioned. But hopefully that will give you the basics of getting started with Sk2, and hopefully I'll be back with some more tutorials in the near future for some of the more advanced options.